Warning. The following episode contains subject matter and scenes that some viewers may find upsetting, disturbing, or unnerving. Please note, viewer discretion is advised at all times. Sit back and enjoy.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit.
Okay, and he's a wrestler?
Yes, what happened, he's a very religious gentleman, and yesterday he was supposed to show up at a pay-per-view and never got on the plane, never showed up. They've tried to reach his wife, Nancy. She doesn't answer. They tried to call his house. It's out of character for him. So at 3 o'clock this morning, there was a message left for one of the other wrestlers, and basically it says, the dogs are in the backyard, the back door is open. Goodbye.
There was no indication whatsoever that this man could possibly turn into this monster and do what he did.
Who gets the knees up blade to the skull that had to rattle the mind of Chris Benoit?
Once searching the house, they were able to locate 3 bodies inside of the home here. Those bodies were Mr. Benoit himself, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel.
Chris Benoit is the person I knew, loved him. Chris Benoit is a wrestler, loved him. Chris Benoit, the person who did what he did, unforgivable.
Hello and welcome back to I Could Murder a Podcast. It's episode number 4. I'm Tom Norris and I'm joined by, weighing in at, I'm not sure, Ben Carter.
Not too much. I'm not weighing in at too much. But I'd rather weigh a hefty amount on the basis of this episode. Wow, what an episode at that.
What does that mean? But we'll carry on.
If I was a wrestler, I'd want to weigh more, is what it meant. I'd also want to be fitter, because I'm struggling to breathe right now.
He's coming to the ring, weighing in at, I don't know, Ben the Kitten Carter.
I'm going to scratch you. It's good to see you, man. Why did I roll with that? I should have just... yeah, what an episode this week. I'm excited.
Yes.
Sent me down a bit of a nostalgia spiral this past few weeks we've been prepping for this case.
Yeah, it's one we both grew up as wrestling fans, so we're both very keen to cover this case. But before we start, if you haven't already, give us a little subscribe. Maybe hit that little notification bell, because we're going to be doing weekly episodes for a very long time now. Well, 12 in total, and I can't figure out in my head how many that is left. But it doesn't.
8.
It doesn't matter how many we got left.
Wrestling fans will get that, and that's the point. We're a true crime show with a little bit of comedy. We're appreciative that
comedy might be a stretch. Slight light entertainment, as well. If you're sitting there going, "Oh, I've watched all the episodes, but I want more," why not go to our Patreon? Because there's so much more over there.
Yeah, the lifeblood of the channel. Why not make your way over there? Any support is massively appreciated. We've got a whole host of episodes. We may even have a few outtakes. Joking, we never get anything wrong.
We do. We really do.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
That's another wrestling reference. I can't remember.
Kurt Angle.
And of course, don't forget to follow us on all our socials at Could Murder a Pod. That's our Twitter and our Instagram. And we've also got a Facebook where we're putting some content up on there. Ask Us Anything is up there, only on there. Go over there and give it a like. Any follows are much appreciated.
Mm-hmm. And we also have a brand new shiny spanking merchandise store.
Yes.
So why not treat yourself or a loved one or a stranger to one of our lovely little merchandises.
So Ben, what case are we covering this week?
This week it's the case of Chris Benoit and the Benoit family murders. So if you stumbled upon, if you smell,
you do.
Yeah. He was a stone cold guy. I was the Rock. That's why we're constantly at odds.
Rikishi, Scotty Hoy.
Fucking hell!
What? You like the stink face? Stink.
Don't.
What?
Take that out, Tom.
I don't know if Tom will. We have to see what he feels like when he's doing it.
So, as Tom mentioned, we both grew up being big wrestling fans. I mean, now the interesting side of it is kind of the behind the curtains, what actually the politics and the, well, we'll get onto this in a bit more detail shortly, I'm sure, but kind of the actual behind the scenes, what was really going on behind the storylines. And that's a dark point to mention for today's case. But we were spoiled, of course, in our early childhood by what's known as the Attitude Era, a 5-year period wherein essentially, I don't know if wrestling has ever recovered from how popular it was then. You know, worldwide, it was giant. We were spoiled by stars such as Stone Cold, The Rock, The Undertaker, Mick Foley, The Big Show, and there's a few of them. I am struggling at 4, but there were a lot. Triple H, big one, another big one. Kane, Rikishi, and there was another individual on this roster at that time who was perhaps, when we stopped watching, kind of just on his journey to the top, and eventually he would make it to the top, and this is where the story takes a slight turn. But we're going to get into all of that. We're going to get into the early life. It's going to be an interesting episode. I'm very excited to cover this case. So we wanted to start this week slightly different. And for the non-wrestling fans who have tuned in, this might also help spell out some of the lingo we're going to be throwing around in this episode. So I've prepared a little pop quiz for Tom. Confident he's going to do well, but
who knows? Who knows? I mean, we do share notes and share a G drive. Did I look at them? Who knows?
So the first, what I'm going to do is list out a few terms, Tom, and I want you to explain to the listener or to the viewer what they mean.
Sure, I'll break it down.
Number 1, kayfabe.
Kayfabe is basically, if you're a fan of wrestling, you don't want to see the two people that are enemies being all friendly outside of the ring. So they carry on the story in the real world. So people who believe in kayfabe, they believe in the story, essentially.
So to break kayfabe is to break the illusion.
Didn't the Iron Sheik and someone were caught driving together?
High on God knows what at the time.
And that was reported in the paper, and then kayfabe was broken for a lot of people, and they kicked off.
Notoriously as well, kayfabe, Bret Hart was kayfabe screwed by Vince McMahon, and he then ended up going to all the news reporters to say, you know, that was not part of the storyline, I was screwed. So he broke kayfabe. So yeah, kayfabe, 1 out of 1, well done. Babyface.
Babyface is someone in the company.
You just don't know what you do to me.
God, that's haunting.
It's kind of
baby cakes, yeah. So Babyface, Ben, is someone in the company who is essentially the good guy. He's the guy that's usually an up-and-comer, and he's there to kind of, fight the bad guys.
Yeah, so the babyface is the champion usually, someone that's popular, someone that's essentially over with what's going on and popular with the fans. What about a heel?
The opposite of that.
The bad guy.
The bad guy.
Say hello to the bad guy.
Yep.
Booker. Not Booker T.
Booker is the guy who's essentially figuring out the shows, picking the matches, and kind of the storyline.
Yeah, so the different companies will have creative teams that do all the writing and storylines. We're not going to use the F word because we don't want to upset anyone, but essentially they script all of the predetermined elements of the show. Okay, promotion.
A promotion is a thing like WWE is a promotion, and back in the day in America, there used to be every kind of state had their own promotions, but Vince McMahon would go on to buy all of them and make them for WWE, apart from a few. So a promotion is essentially the name of the company that put on the shows. Yeah,
and back in the day, like late 80s, 70s, 60s, they were all operated out of different territories. Vince McMahon famously went on to say that he bought out his competition, so it all became one entity. Okay, and then promo.
Promo is a thing to the camera.
I imagine you'd be very good at promos.
I don't know. I don't think I would. Ric Flair, very good at them. To the camera, kind of hyping up the match, trying to sell tickets, get bums on seats, essentially.
Yeah, to cut a promo on someone would be to call someone out or to set a scene.
Yeah. Go on, you can try one.
I got nervous just looking at the camera.
Ben Carr, I'm going to be fighting you this week in Stevenage. You're a piece of trash. I'm going to step on your neck. Open up your brain, get all the dirty thoughts out. Expose you for what you really are. I'm not going to go into more detail than that because you'll get cancelled. Like that.
So Tom just cut a promo on me. Notorious Nozza, I heard what you said about me. I heard what you said about my sister. I heard what you did with my sister. And this Saturday night. I've got a sister in.
Oh.
Don't break kayfabe.
Sorry.
Oh, and it's gone.
Sorry.
So there you go. So yeah, 6 out of 6.
Thank you.
Two more bonus ones for you.
Okay.
A pop.
Is when the crowd go crazy for a certain thing they've planned in the show.
Absolutely. So to get a good pop would be to win over the crowd or get a massive cheer.
Yeah.
Massive reaction. And finally, a shoot.
A shoot is when it's usually retired wrestlers when they're kind of bitching about other wrestlers.
Yeah, essentially, if you're shooting on someone, you're calling them out, you're calling them for truth, you're breaking kayfabe.
Yeah.
But also shoot, if a match is going on and then suddenly someone starts to shoot, that means that they're fighting you for real and they're shooting on you by physically being, not wrestling a predetermined match, but it becomes...
You throw a few real blows.
You potato someone, is what I've heard. I'll potato you in a minute.
Everything you say sounds creepy.
Okay, so shall we get into it?
Please.
So Christopher Michael Benoit was born in Montreal, Canada on May the 21st, 1967. He was the son to Michael and Margaret Benoit, and he also had an older sister.
Laurie Benoit.
Good name.
Every time.
Every time.
You're going to struggle picking your child's name.
I love everything.
Because you're barren. I'm only kidding. I'm sure they're good. Swimmers. So Chris Benoit would have a relatively normal upbringing in childhood. He was very much into his sports. He played American football. He played a defensive end. Doesn't mean anything to me. At 12 years old, he attended a local wrestling event, which he saw two performers who very much stood out, which was Tom the Dynamite Kid and Bret Hart.
And from Hitman.
And from this moment, he was obsessed with wrestling, and he knew from the age of 12 that's the only thing he wanted to do.
Yeah, and I mean, some people transition into the world of wrestling. So, nowadays WWE may hire people that have been in the acting world or the entertainment world or sports. Hire American footballers that transition to the world. For Chris Benoit and everything we've looked at, all he wanted to do, there was no other job that he would take pay for. He wanted to be a wrestler, and that was that. He
lost his tooth when he was pretending to wrestle with his dog as a kid, and he decided to never get that tooth replaced because he's like, I won't need it being wrestling. It'll just come out again. So he was like, I'm going to just keep that out. In high school, he won numerous awards for wrestling and bodybuilding and had an unwavering focus on becoming a world-class wrestler. They say in a lot of documentaries, things you read about him growing up, at one stage in WWE, it was WWF back then, they were very much all about the tall, muscular kind of guys. And Chris Benoit was 5'10", so not tiny, but he was very aware that he wasn't fit in the mold of what would be a classic body form for a wrestler.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at photos of him, I mean, even for a small guy, he is big all over.
Stacked.
Swole,
I think they say, don't they, Dan?
Yeah.
As we mentioned, Benoit, one of his heroes was Bret the Hitman Hart, who would go on to train at the Hart family home with Stu Hart in the Dungeon, which is anyone who's into wrestling would have heard of the Dungeon. The Hart family obviously had a lot of wrestlers within the family, and they would train with Stu Hart, who was an ex-wrestler, in the Dungeon. And it was commonly heard of that you'd hear lots of screams of pain as Stu would stretch you out, basically doing submission moves on you, which would genuinely really hurt. And it kind of teaching the wrestlers all about that kind of style of wrestling.
So we talked about the shoot where Bret Hart was screwed, and there's an excellent documentary called Wrestling with Shadows, and in that it's on YouTube. In that footage you do see, and Stu Hart at the time is like in his late 60s, early 70s, and he's got kind of big football players in their early 20s in these different holds, and you can just hear them absolutely screaming. He's like, well, I got it is like that.
Do it, carry on.
I can't because the shock on your face. I should have used that for my promo voice. Tom Norris. No, you'd beat me in that fight. He would lose. My guy.
And the thing about the Stu Hart thing was he didn't look like he was putting any effort in whatsoever. He just knew that the kind of buttons to push to really, really hurt you. Yeah. But I mean, it was a merit and it was a badge of honor for any wrestler to go to the Hart School.
That was the place you wanted to learn.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of big wrestlers did go there and learn an awful lot.
That was like getting into Hogwarts, I'd imagine. I don't watch Harry Potter, but I'd imagine.
Why are you so defensive about Harry Potter? You've never watched Harry Potter?
Not fully. Not the whole way through. I'm more of a Lord of the Rings guy.
You're very awkward.
Thank you very much.
Awkward.
Hawk.
Not orcs.
So, as Tom mentioned, he trained in Stu Hart's dungeon, and although he was, a slightly smaller guy, he was very stacked, he was very stocky. In the ring, he was exceptional. He could do the basics, the fundamentals, but he was technically very, very gifted. So he began emulating both the Dynamite Kid and Bret Hart. He cultivated a high-risk physical style as well as a very technical. So he was able to put people into different submission holds, but he was fundamentally a very gifted technical wrestler.
Yeah, he made his in-ring debut in November 1985, where he participated in a tag team match and ended up winning after pinning one of the opponents down with a sunset flip.
Sunset flip.
Yes, indeed.
And that was for Stampede Wrestling as well, which was owned by Stu Hart. So he'd obviously been training in the dungeon with Stu, and Stu saw something in him, gave him his debut with his own pop quiz promotion. I nearly forgot.
So during his initial period at Stu Hart Stampede, he ended up winning 4 British Commonwealth titles and 4 international tag team titles. In 1989, he bid goodbye to Stampede Wrestling and moved to Japan to join the New Japan Pro Wrestling. So Japan, again, for non-wrestling fans, Japan's a huge wrestling scene over there.
That was the place to go.
It seems to be a lot of the big-time wrestlers went there and did their time over there, learned from the kind of wrestling style.
So the Japanese style was renowned for its, the Japanese wrestling was renowned for its strong style, often approach, wherein the wrestlers would hit each other for real on occasion to make it look even more of a spectacle to the crowd.
Yeah, and over there it was very much it's more respected by the crowd. If someone was able to take these hits and keep fighting and keep going, it kind of added more to the drama over there. Over there, he was known as the Pegasus Kid. And later on there, he would start wearing a mask. Throughout the early 90s, he established himself over there, winning the Best of Super Juniors tournament twice and securing a win in the Super J Cup tournament. So yeah, he went over there, he won. Again, it's a sign of, obviously, they believed in him, they made him their boy, the baby face. They've made him win all these titles. So it just shows he's gone on immediately to kind of impress wherever he's gone so far.
And in adopting the mask and a slightly different style, so he was a bit more of a high flyer wearing the mask. And Benoit said on numerous occasions he hated wearing the mask, but it eventually became a part of him. So at this stage, he's shown that he's a very good mat wrestler, technical wrestler, submission holder, high flyer. He's basically able to do everything, and he's at this point attracted the interest from a fairly big organization. Benoit was attracting quite a lot of attention, and at this point in 1992, the WCW, or the World Championship Wrestling, signed Benoit. And he was only with them for a year. He would later return, but during this time he made his debut, teaming up with fellow Canadian wrestler Biff Wellington, and we'll mention his name later on in a little bit of trivia. For the NWA World Tag Team Championship tournaments, however, they were defeated by Brian Pillman and Jushin Thunder Liger at the first round.
Biff Wellington is a terrible name for a wrestler, I have to say.
So after a year with WCW, Benoit would return to Japan for a few months, and then he was signed by Extreme Championship Wrestling, or more commonly known as ECW, run by Paul Heyman. So they were a much more kind of hardcore they referred to themselves, while everything else was kind of rock and roll, they were grunge. Classically, as Paul Heyman once described them, but they were very much, they would have, although they'd be known for their hardcore, lots of weapons, tables, ladders, chairs, they were also known to display very gifted wrestlers as well. So that would be the place to go before you make the jump to one of the big boys, and you can really display your talents there. Yeah,
ECW as well is kind of, they're just as well known for their fans as they were for the wrestlers. The shows were lots of energy, lots of kind of fan participation in a way, and their chants and everything like that. It was very much the kind of underground, the kind of cool, the wrestling promotion to follow.
Fiercely loyal fans as well. Yeah. So during his time at a pay-per-view event called November to Remember, Benoit accidentally broke a fellow wrestler's neck, and this was a wrestler called Sabu, and there is footage of this on YouTube. It is grim. So this is also from within the opening seconds of the match. So the match starts, everything looks normal, and even in the initial period, when you're watching this video, you're like, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Sabu takes a heck of a beating from Benoit, pre-neck break. The injury came when Benoit threw Sabu with the intention that he take a face-first pancake bump. However, Sabu attempted to turn mid-air and take the fall on his back instead. However, he wasn't able to achieve the full rotation and landed almost directly on his neck.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing with wrestling. Even though people look at it and they think it's just fake, they are putting their bodies on the line. And, you know, lots and lots and lots of people have had terrible injuries as they've gone on. Many concussions, which is going to be very, very relevant to this case, and lots of bumps to the body, which is going to either affect them immediately or later on in their life.
And it's the only sport or entertainment wherein if someone breaks their neck, they're expected to continue. So famously, Owen Hart broke Stone Cold Steve Austin's neck, and Stone Cold had to...
I think it's more of it's not like they're expected to, it's more of a case of they're in a situation where obviously with the kayfabe, the audience think they're acting, and even the other wrestler, you can't say, "Oh mate, can you stop? You've actually properly hurt me." Yeah. So it's like you're in a situation where it's not really easy to communicate how you are. I know referees now make more of an effort to actually talk to them and double check them throughout the wrestling event, but it is a tricky one because some wrestlers, they look at it as, you know, they have to continue no matter what.
Yeah, the show must go on. I mean, famously when Owen Hart tragically fell from the rafters, they made the decision. I mean, he died in the ring there and then, but they made the decision to get him out the ring and continue with the show. After the match with Sabu, I mean, he was rushed off by medical professionals, but Benoit was a wreck at the prospect of potentially paralyzing someone. However, Paul Heyman, the ECW owner and booker, immediately came back to the locker room saying, you know, this is great. We've got an angle here. You're now going to be known as the Canadian Crippler. And that was a name that initially Benoit wasn't very comfortable using. However, they turned it into a bit of an angle and a storyline. And he would eventually then shoot, cut promos, being proud to have... they kind of wrote it into the script, if that makes sense. Sure.
That probably influenced the name of the Crippler Crossface, his finishing move later on. So obviously, like we discussed, there's a lot of injuries in wrestling, and when you're fighting people, you really have to trust them. And a lot of times with that, you know, you trust someone you have these big battles with, you end up becoming very, very close friends. And that's exactly the case that happened with Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, who met in Japan wrestling. They had some big bouts against one another. Yeah. They started off, they didn't really like each other. They kind of pissed each other off. Yeah. But then after a while, they kind of started respecting one another for their wrestling ability and, you know, just how far they would go with the fights. So, yeah, they developed a big, strong bond, and, you know, they were thick as thieves by the, as time would go on.
Eddie Guerrero was one of the ones that, I mean, Benoit, looking back to it, I never remember thinking that highly of him just because he didn't really have that much charisma at the time, so I couldn't appreciate the technical gift that I guess he had. Eddie Guerrero, on the other hand, was but eventually his angle was that he was someone that lied, cheated and stealed, so he provided a lot of like kind of comical elements, although he was a very, very gifted athlete as well.
Because I watched it, when I was watching it, I thought Eddie was more of a joke kind of character. I didn't think of him as a particularly good wrestler, whereas Benoit, I thought he had more mystery to him, and you could see by his wrestling style he was a bit different.
And watching back as well, in researching for this, their early matches in Japan and stuff, they were properly going at each other, like really slamming each other into the ground. It was brutal looking back, because I don't remember it looking that real.
So following on from the incident with Sabu, he's garnered a lot of heat in ECW. His storyline that they followed through with has really got people interested in him as a character. And WCW decided they wanted to get him back wrestling with them again, and they wanted to kind of utilize the kind of momentum behind him.
Definitely. And I think it was possibly influenced by Ric Flair to get this guy in, because they were looking for a fourth member to join the Four Horsemen, and Ric Flair single-handedly picked out or had identified Benoit as the guy he wanted there. So he comes back to the WCW down in Florida, and then again his career kicks up a gear.
Definitely, yeah. So in wrestling, there's a lot of creatives, and a lot of wrestlers actually end up getting involved with the creative, coming up with the ideas. And there was a wrestler at WCW called Kevin Sullivan. He was known as kind of being a bit demon-y.
Yeah, he had a cult leader kind of character.
Kevin Sullivan had a valet or a kind of manager, essentially someone who doesn't wrestle, but they're with you all the time. They do promos with you and whatnot. And her character was called Woman.
Yeah, and this was, at the time, Nancy Sullivan, though she would spoiler alert, go on to become Nancy Benoit. And this is a very interesting dynamic. And this is kind of the fascinating side that we mentioned, where the behind the curtain and outside of kayfabe, Kevin Sullivan essentially scripted his own divorce.
Yes, there's sometimes in this stuff, there's a blurring of between kayfabe and real life. And Kevin Sullivan was like, I think it'd be an interesting angle for women to get close to, to leave me in the storyline, go with Chris.
Yeah.
They did a lot of promos together where they were
Betray
hugging.
me.
Yeah, betray me, hugging and, being very close. And the angle was Kevin wanted to win her back. But actually what was going on behind the scenes was spending a lot of time together, Nancy and Chris. And essentially would end up together. So Chris was actually married as well at the time, and he had 2 kids at the time as well. But that didn't stop them; they were very much drawn to one another. Apparently, you could see it. You could see it with them. You could see the chemistry with them on camera, and it was very much real.
And because they didn't want to break kayfabe, they obviously had to spend all of their time outside of wrestling together as well. So that, as Tom said, they were going for dinners together. They were staying in the same hotels together. They very famously shot like a number of vignettes where Benoit was. And again, this is the part I remember why I wasn't the biggest fan of him, though he was gifted, is just his acting or the charisma side just wasn't there. But there is a shot of him like drinking a glass of red wine with Nancy in his arm going, you don't know what you've got until it's gone, and it's super fine, or something like that. Whilst portraying these characters, it etched into their real lives, and they fell in love, and Nancy decided to leave Sullivan for real. Yeah,
Sullivan wasn't the best partner. There was talk of abuse, physical abuse, getting very angry and lashing out at Nancy. Sandy, Nancy's sister, says a story where Kevin Sullivan has been violent, and Nancy's left and gone to Chris, and Chris has kind of been portrayed as the saviour here, as the safe
shoulder
space
to cry on, and the trustworthy individual, which at the time obviously she had no reason to believe that it was anything but that.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. They continue with this angle despite Nancy then leaving Sullivan for Benoit, and there's a match at WCW Bash at the Beach where it sort of turns into a shoot fight, and Benoit allegedly punched Sullivan so hard in the ear that he shattered his eardrum. Yeah,
you can see, there's footage of it. They've actually properly thrown fists at one another. You can imagine, like, no matter how professional you are, with that kind of things going on behind the scenes, you're gonna maybe leave a fist in or whatever. It gets very violent indeed. But all of this would just help grow Chris Benoit as a character, and the momentum behind him was increasing even more. There's more heat behind him. He was winning WCW titles. He was being put as one of the main guys, and as we said before, he's only, in that terms, 5'10", a small guy, but they were happy to push him because of how technically gifted he was.
Yeah.
All the wrestlers, they loved working with him. There's a story Chris Jericho, another wrestler, says with Chris, he was such a professional. If he would mess anything up slightly, he would punish himself. Chris went backstage one time when Chris slightly did a kick wrong in the match, and he found Chris Benoit doing squats, and he had to do, I think it was 200 squats.
Because he missed, he was in the wrong space to take a kick from Jericho.
Yes, so he had to punish himself.
Still a 5-star match, but to him, that then becomes like a 1.5-star match.
Exactly, so 200 squats to punish himself, had to learn from it, and it's that kind of professionalism which kind of really pushed him forward.
Yeah, the Radicals. So this was Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Benoit. And as they are kind of looking of which option to take, the WWF at the time approached them, and it's an opportunity too big for them to turn down.
So he joins WWE in the year 2000, which is 15 years into his wrestling career, which even that itself is a long career.
Yeah.
And you think he's been in things like ECW, very much known for their hard and hardcore style. He's been in Japan, which is known for their strong style, again, which is essentially punching people for real. One of his finishing moves being the flying headbutt, which he basically jumps off the turnbuckle and head first, essentially.
Yeah. If there's one way to kind of steadily damage your brain,
that would be it. I mean, when you do that thing where you, even if you try and like stand on the side of a pool, don't use your hands, fall in without kind of protecting your face.
Bracing.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Jumping off a turnbuckle or even a cage or whatever, doing that move would be terrifying.
Sitting down on a couch without first placing your hand on the cushion.
there's a bit of a curse of the flying headbutt. It was invented by Harley Race, and he warned everybody not to do it. It ruins your spine and old age because it's just such a kind of an impact on the body. Then the Dynamite Kid would hear that and go, I'm going to do it anyway. So he started doing it, and he ends up in a wheelchair. The Dynamite Kid was from Liverpool.
Scouse wrestler.
Yes, and he...
wrestler.
A wrestler?
Play football. Wrestler.
That's Irish.
Just want to play football.
So Dynamite Kid, he also has a very turbulent kind of history of abuse and with his partner and whatnot. But yeah, there's a documentary about him. It's very... So Dynamite Kid would also say, not to kind of follow on with that wrestling move, but Chris Benoit, he would then take on that mantle of doing that as a finisher. And, well, we all know what happened with Chris Benoit. It seems to be a kind of a curse of the flying headbutt.
Yeah, and obviously Benoit was heavily inspired by the Dynamite Kid, really looked up to him and Bret Hart. And yeah, the similarities there in the aftermath of wrestling. Benoit was still wrestling at the time.
The other thing as well is people, a lot of people I'm sure watching this won't like wrestling, which is absolutely fine. But if you watch it and you think, oh, the hitting on the head of the chair, oh, it's a fake chair. It's just a chair. It's made out of felt. No, it's actually a real steel chair, and the blood is real. Those hits on the head, again, it was a sign of if you can take a bump, can you take that hit in your head and can you keep on wrestling? That's a sign of I
mean, even the ring itself, it's like minimal padding. It's like put a couple of these on there and then taking a couple of them.
Those listeners, it's a couple of Ben's shirts.
Ben's flannel shirt.
George.
Cough.
So yeah, they are real bumps. The only thing about wrestling is there's a predetermined result in the match, but you are going to end up getting hurt in the match. After every match, you'll more than likely be quite stiff and in pain. So getting hit on these head with these chairs year after year,
night after night.
Yeah, night after night. Yeah, because that's the thing about the wrestling work schedule.
Yeah,
it's literally day after day, isn't it?
The lifestyle of a professional wrestler or even an amateur one that does it enough, it is brutal. They're working like 300 days a year, often in prolonged period of times where they get no day off, sometimes in multiple events in a day, putting their body through absolute...
Because a lot of people will think, oh, well, the SmackDown or the two, the main ones, SmackDown and Raw, that's once a week, so they only do 2 days. No, throughout that, they're doing live events.
They tour the whole country.
They're doing live events. Vince McMahon's getting the absolute, most he can out of these people.
And they're trying to keep their bodies going.
Exactly.
So you hear this whole thing of roid rage, whereas actually the steroids weren't taken to enhance their muscles, although in some cases, yes, but mostly it was to repair injuries.
And it's, pain pills they'd be taken, and there's a very much culture of kind of self-medicating as well to deal with this. But
Mickey Rourke's Mickey Rourke's the wrestler. That's what I'd say you watch. But it is actually, that's a real insight and an eye-opening insight to the life of a professional wrestler.
It is, yes. So because at first you want to think it's quite a glamorous lifestyle, but it is a lot of work that goes into it.
Unless you're at the very, very top, like your Stone Colds and your Rocks, in the mid-card, there's hundreds of other guys vying for that spot. And if you're injured, there was no health care, whatever they had. So if they're injured, you're expected to either fight injured or not get paid. And if there's hundreds of guys trying to vie for your spot, obviously you work injured. If you've got families to feed and bills to pay, unless you're in that upper echelon.
Good word.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, pretty good.
Then, you're working every day of the year. But apparently as well, Benoit absolutely loved that about it. He loved doing what he did.
Yeah, he that's all he ever wanted to do. It's the only job he ever had. It was being a wrestler. And he would very much he'd find it hard being away from his kids, but he thought that's what he had to do to maintain. So the year 2000, when he joined WWF, was actually a big year for him in other terms. Nancy gave birth to Benoit's son, Daniel, and the couple got married in 2000 as well.
And Daniel, I believe, although he was only 1 or 2 at the time, was the best man.
Yes.
Yeah,
imagine that speech.
Well, after years of obviously climbing the ladder and constantly people saying you're not big enough, you're not exciting enough, there's no charisma, that was mainly just me. Benoit actually finally makes it to the top of the ladder. And at WrestleMania 20, Benoit triumphs against all odds by beating Triple H and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat match. And these are both also wrestlers that have very much paid their dues. And there's a very famous scene wherein Eddie Guerrero was a champion at the time. Chris Benoit is now a world heavyweight champion as well. They've both got the 2 top belts in the company. They close the show out together. Confetti's falling from the roof, and Eddie Guerrero just comes out and they embrace.
Because Eddie Guerrero, he won the title that night as well.
Yeah, they both had basically overcome all the odds. They both got completely over with the fans. The fans were, it was almost as if any scripted element was out of the window at this point, and the fans were just appreciating them for what they'd achieved and what they were. So both Eddie and Chris are, at the top of their game. Life is good. And unfortunately, it wouldn't last for too long.
No, I mean, a lot of the times, like we said before, self-medicating. Eddie Guerrero had his own demons. He was very much self-medicating himself. He had overdosed a few times before. He went and got treatment, and then he came back to wrestling.
So Eddie, Chavo, and Chris all check into the same hotel. They're obviously on the road at this point, and they're preparing for an event the following day. They decide to head to their separate rooms, and they all say goodnight to each other. So Chavo Guerrero, the nephew of Eddie, was first to wake up the following morning. They were all going to go to the gym together extra early before an event. Chavo gets a call from the front desk to say that his uncle Eddie is not answering his morning wake-up call. They go to knock on the door. There's no answer. So they cut the chain lock. They find Eddie with his toothbrush face down in the hotel bathroom. Chavo tries to revive his uncle, and the team that arrived try to revive him. Unfortunately, he's after a period of time just gurgling and eventually unresponsive, and he had died of heart. That's fucking hard to say, and he had passed away as a result of a heart attack. Yeah, and that really hit the whole company, the world. I remember seeing the tribute show for Eddie, and it's hard. He was such a popular guy. He was over with the fans, over with the locker room. And his body had, the shelf life on these guys when they are putting their bodies through that, and the relentless touring, relentless events. It's
the cocktail of drugs that they've been taking as well. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, as we said, they're going to be suffering from a lot of pain, a lot of different injuries, and it is a cocktail of drugs they're taking. Sometimes, it's mixed with booze as well and recreational drugs. Yeah. And Eddie, sadly, his body wasn't able to keep up with it.
Yeah. But an enlarged heart, I think it was.
Yes, in the end. Yes. And like the thing about these tributes is, you see these big, scary wrestlers, and they're all in tears. Yeah. And it just shows how much that Eddie meant to them. Yeah. And it hit the hardest, easily hit the hardest. It hit Benoit. Yeah. He was absolutely in bits.
So you talked about obviously the wrestlers that you trust and the wrestlers that you build these friendships with. There was I'd never seen a friendship like with Benoit and Eddie. They were essentially, and Benoit apparently was just very much kept himself to himself, didn't open up to anyone. But with Eddie, for whatever reason, going back to Japan and ECW and WCW and now the WWE together, they were like brothers. They were, and Benoit in that video when he says something along the lines of, I love you, Eddie, and I'll see you soon. Yeah. But he is a wreck.
Yeah, I mean, Eddie had such an influence on Chris as well. Because Chris wasn't religious, Eddie was very religious. He'd be known to say scripture to wrestlers in the dressing room. And Eddie gave Chris a Bible, which Chris would take with him. After Eddie's death, Chris started writing in a diary addressed to Eddie, believing he was actually communicating directly with him. That could just be a case of that's a coping mechanism when people deal with grief in different kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. That could also be a sign that maybe Chris's sense of reality has slightly shifted a little bit here. And his behaviour has changed slightly. And during this time as well, Chris was actually having quite a lot of difficulty with Nancy. Be lots of arguments. And Nancy, she was from the wrestling world herself. She's a very strong woman. She wouldn't take any shit, and she would give as much good as she got. She wouldn't just lay down to Benoit. She was very kind of, if he was being out of order, she would tell him. And there's even a time apparently when they were driving along, they had an argument, and Benoit would go on to smash the windscreen with his bare fists. That just shows the rage he had within him, and that's a scary thing because he was a very, very strong guy, and he obviously had a temper.
The marriage is now also on the rocks. Chris throws himself back into work immediately, going on different tours and going to different countries and performing. But yeah, again, his marriage is falling apart, and his world, now that Eddie's not in it, is also falling apart.
Yeah, and he did love being a father. He loved Daniel to bits. And there's also footage of Daniel and David. David is Chris's son from a previous marriage. They were thick as thieves as well. They wanted to be the tag team champions, and like it's like a lovely family scene when you see them all together. And yeah, when Chris was home, he was very good with the kids. But yeah, there was a lot of kind of animosity and arguments happening between him and Nancy. So as we said, Chris and Nancy were arguing an awful lot. And one time Sandra received a call from Nancy saying that she needed to come to the house quickly, which she did. And also Mike Durham, who's another wrestler called Johnny Grunge, who lived in the local area. He was also called to come to the house. Mike would say he would go and restrain Chris to kind of, keep him away from Nancy. But sadly, by this stage, though Chris had already lashed out at Nancy, Mike would then take Chris away to a local hotel. Sandy would stay with Nancy at the family home. She would go on to apply for a restraining order against Chris. Just that just shows how badly this relationship has got a restraining order against him. But then Chris would keep ringing Sandra, keep ringing her, saying, I'm really sorry. Let me talk to her. Eventually, Sandra gave the phone to Nancy. She spoke to Chris for a little bit, and then the next day, Chris returned to the family home. They were talking, and they were basically back together once again. And this is something that Sandra's looked back on and she feels guilty for. But you can't blame herself.
Who could predict what's
to come?
What's to come? Yeah.
And talk about what's to come, I think it's time for us to jump into the timeline.
So on Tuesday, the 19th of June, 2007, Chris Benoit would wrestle his last ever match, and he defeats Elijah Burke, another WWE superstar. Now, the thing that's quite poignant about this match is you will also see Chris's last ever diving headbutt. And Elijah Burke, the guy he's fighting, attempts to reverse the move by raising his knees. And Chris goes face first from the top turnbuckle into the knees. It's a pretty graphic thing to see.
So Friday the 22nd of June 2007, reports on Saturday claimed Benoit rushed home on Friday due to a family emergency. Benoit did not go on to wrestle the shows he was scheduled to wrestle.
On Saturday, the 23rd of June 2007, it was reported that Benoit did not work the Vengeance pay-per-view and was replaced by Johnny Nitro.
On Saturday, the 23rd of June 2007 at 3:30 p.m, fellow wrestler Chavo Guerrero received a voicemail message from Benoit's phone stating that he overslept and he missed his flight and would be late for that night's house show in Beaumont, Texas. Guerrero called Benoit back, and Benoit sounded tired and groggy as he confirmed everything that he said in his voice message. Guerrero was concerned about Benoit's tone and demeanour, called him back 12 minutes later, and Benoit did not answer the call. Guerrero left a message and asking Benoit to call him back.
So Benoit would later call Guerrero back, stating he did not answer the call because Nancy and his son Daniel had food poisoning and he was tending to them. He had also been on the phone with Delta Airlines to change his flight so that he could get back to work.
So yeah, he said they got food poisoning, but he's also said now that they're vomiting blood. So it's kind of, I've never heard of food poisoning doing that to someone.
Yeah.
So Sunday the 24th of June 2007, 5 text messages were sent to co-workers between 3:51 a.m. and 3:58 a.m. using both Chris's phone and Nancy's phone. So 4 of these were basically stating his address and letting them know the locations of where his dogs are at the address, which if you just randomly receive that message...
At like 4 a.m. as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even if you just send it just during the day, that's not a message to receive from someone. This is my house address and my dogs are kept at this part of the house.
Yeah. And he said my physical address as well, which I think, or from what I looked at, because he was quite a paranoid guy towards the later part of his life, and he would basically only ever give out PO box numbers where he would collect things from. He would never give out his physical address. So obviously that's also a
toward the end of his life, he was thinking he was getting followed by people and things like that. So yeah, that's very true. And so he sent these messages out to people, and immediately when you receive that, especially at that time, that's alarm bells are ringing.
Yeah,
you're contacting people who are closer or the police to go and check on him.
Yeah, and to go back to the calls with Chavo Guerrero as well, obviously he's just informed him they've got food poisoning, I'm changing my flights, and then apparently, which is just completely out of character for Chris, he goes, Chavo, I love you. And Chavo was kind of taken back by that. So he said, yeah, I love you too, man. See you later.
Yeah.
But it was, quite a poignant moment. So on Monday, the 25th of June, it's brought to the attention of the WWE the text messages that went to Chavo and a number of other wrestlers. So they decide that the best thing to do is to send of course, seeing those text messages, the first thing they want to do is send a welfare check to the Benoit house. and there is some audio of this call being made. They describe Benoit. He looks like your typical wrestler, big neck, and police are sent to perform a welfare check at the address.
So the police arrive at the Benoit household and they immediately announce it a major crime scene. They found the body of Nancy Benoit as well as Daniel Benoit, and then finally they found Chris's body.
There was no evidence of any intruders. It's immediately cordoned off and an investigation is launched.
Yeah, I mean, immediately the police, when they did find the bodies, each body had a Bible beside them, and it looked very much, like it's not a planned attack, but it seemed to be very kind of thought out how everything was placed. There's evidence of alcohol being drunk, lots of alcohol being drunk.
With the police sharing this information with the WWE, they decide to cancel what was a scheduled typical Monday Night Raw and instead air a tribute show to Benoit. So the WWE would come under a lot of scrutiny for this. So it was alleged that they were informed of the high possibility it was a double murder suicide on behalf of Benoit. However, they still decide, I think, a half an hour or an hour before the show goes ahead to proceed with the tribute show for Chris.
I mean, obviously, as well as it's a 3-hour show, so they've turned that into a tribute show, and they got wrestlers, talking to camera, crying, saying how much they love Chris, and they're so sorry. But I feel a bit conflicted here because I don't feel like they mustn't have known. I know it's been alluded to, because no one's gonna. The press for that would have been.
Yeah, well, that's where most of the allegations have come from. They allege that the Vince and the WWE were made aware maybe half an hour, 45 minutes before the scheduled tribute show. And all that was essentially they had a Chris Benoit career DVD from a couple years ago that they ran, and then they intertwined that with wrestlers.
Yeah, I mean, some wrestlers have refused to be on it, even though they looked up to Chris because they wanted to wait until they knew more about the situation. Chris Jericho was one of those people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can completely understand why they've become under fire for that. If they were told that, then that is absolutely baffling. I mean, as well with those shows, it's a huge stadium because it starts with Vince in the middle of the ring, the complete empty audience, which is immediately quite striking.
Yeah.
But that's a huge event which they've cancelled, and that's would in itself take a lot of.
Well, yeah, and another thing that they cancelled is Vince McMahon, the character, was currently had just been written off TV, like in an explosion in his limo. So fans were very confused to see him back in the ring.
Yeah, it's such a moment, because Vince completely get rid of that storyline.
Yeah.
Vince, they never even reference that storyline ever again. It's completely wiped out.
The tribute show airs on Monday the 25th of June, and it's called Remembering Chris Benoit, where they run highlights of his career, and wrestlers leave kind of their testimonies on him. Now, one that was really interesting and poignant, and this is kind of what is making me think that some of them did know, is William Regal. He says, "I won't say anything about the man, but he was a damn good wrestler."
Yeah, I think William Regal, he's one of the people that received the text messages from Chris, and I think they all knew that the relationship with Nancy was quite volatile at times. So he might have just been, because he seems quite savvy, Regal. He might have just been able to put 2 and 2 together. Because again, I think if you know that he's gone and done this, you're not going to go on camera.
Yeah,
and saying you just say no, I'm not going to do it. So we're going to go into now actually what happened on those nights, and go into a bit more detail about actually the crime scene.
Because what I think was also quite interesting about this tribute show is towards the end of it, you mentioned it was a 3-hour show. News was starting to break that it was a double murder homicide. So very conflicting for the WWE. And again, it depends which side you believe on that.
Okay, so we're going to go back in the timeline now and actually talk about the events that happened on those nights. So Friday the 22nd of June 2007, the autopsies actually revealed that Nancy Benoit died this night at an undisclosed time by strangulation. She was found wrapped in a towel with her limbs bound with a Bible beside her. The injuries indicate that Benoit pressed his knee into her back while pulling on a cord around her neck. Blood was found under her head, suggesting that she attempted to fend him off. However, official signs saw no sign of immediate struggle. And also it was reported that he actually broke her back with his knee, and he's a very strong, powerful man. He's strangling, he's put so much force into that he actually broke her back with his knee as well, which
That's
just
insane.
Yeah.
And she, to a point, had been fighting back as well with the.
Yeah. I mean, this was fight flight, I imagine. But it just shows how powerful and how much aggression he was showing there.
On the following day, so bear in mind Nancy had already been murdered, Chris's young son Daniel Benoit was suffocated in his bedroom by his father. The exact time is unknown. However, it is known that Daniel was sedated with Xanax and was most likely unconscious at the time he was killed. So if there's one small positive to take, it's that he didn't know it was happening. Daniel had internal injuries to his throat area showing no bruises. A copy of a Bible was left by his body. The medical examiner also found old needle marks in the arm of Daniel Benoit, which could have been from HGH, which is human growth hormone, shots that he was likely given when he was younger. At the time, he was a very small 7-year-old child, so he had been given some hormone boosters to apparently enhance his size. But again, really interesting part about that is that there were no kind of physical bruises, so he'd obviously, with completely the opposite to Nancy, he'd tried to do this in as delicate and
he didn't want, it sounds strange to say, he wanted to kill him, but he didn't want to hurt him.
Yeah, whereas Nancy, I think it was both.
He's obviously left the Bible by both of the bodies, but there's also other religious elements to these murders. Chris wrote a suicide note and placed it inside a Bible, and also he had 2 internet searches which are quite haunting. On the final morning, there was a Bible passage about a young boy being resurrected. That in itself kind of confuses me, because is that a case
Thinking
of
about the afterlife?
Well, his resurrection is bringing him back to life, isn't it? So is it a case of he's done this in full of rage, and then he's realised what he's done, and he wants to bring Daniel back? Is that why he's Googling it? Because I mean, it seems quite odd that you've just committed the murder and then you Google in resurrection.
Well, at the time, they would note that Benoit had 4 times the normal amount of testosterone in his system. So he's clearly, maybe provoked, or maybe an argument has happened with Nancy. Maybe it was a sudden thing. Maybe it wasn't as pre-planned, although it's all conjecture at this point, because the only people that will know what happened are no longer with us.
Yeah.
So he's either pre-planned all of this and premeditated all of this, or it's spiraled out of control and all of a sudden been prompted.
It's interesting when you see other wrestlers' interviews about this case and about Chris Benoit. Lots of people just kind of saying, how much they respected him as a wrestler, and how he was a pure gentleman. He loved their family. He's loved his family so much. Wrestler Stevie Ray said, if I lined up 100 wrestlers who would do something this heinous, he wouldn't make the list. Axel Rotten, another wrestler, theorized that maybe Nancy may have hurt Daniel, and then Chris came home and he saw what she'd done, and then he lashed out, which is just like victim blame in my mind. It's like they just don't want to believe that Chris could go on and do this kind of thing. And like we said, over time, Chris is self-medicated. He's also been, numerous concussions, which is a really big factor on this. Chris Nowinski, who he's a doctor, he gets very involved after the case. He says, if you're hit in the head thousands of times, your brain can essentially start to rot and change who you are. Yeah. And Chris Benoit, speaking to him, once said, asked him how many concussions he had, and he said 6. And then Benoit said, I've had more concussions than I could count. Yeah. So it's such a big factor in this case, is the fact that, yes, Chris Benoit as a person 20, 30 years ago, that is not his character. This is not within him. But as time developed with more concussions, his brain shifted and him as a person shifted.
And as well, the pain management, apparently he'd, in the final months, definitely increased the level of alcohol he would indulge in as well. And obviously the amount found, there was an empty bottle of wine found next to Benoit, as well as 10 empty beer cans.
So another search found on the computer of Chris Benoit was the quickest and most painless way to break your own neck, which seems quite, it's such a
it's hideous given what he did to Nancy.
Yeah.
It's as if him and his son deserve the most painless possible way, but Nancy...
Yeah, and what basically discovered was, essentially, if your neck out of nowhere experienced a heavy weight on it, it could break easily, and then it would lead to death. As a wrestler, Chris had a gym in his house, and he used a weight machine, the pull down, to create a noose around the end. We're using the cord, put a towel around it, put it to the heaviest weight, I think it was 200, and then essentially take the pin out, and then the weight itself just it hanged him.
And I hate to go back to the size of Chris's neck, but multiple police would state that the amount of weight he had ready to drop would have literally pulled the head off of a normal man.
Yeah, and when the police went into the house and they walked into the gym, it was quite like a gym would be, lots of mirrors, and they thought, because the way his body was positioned, it looked like as if he was standing there. They told him to kind of freeze and to put his hands up, but then they realised that he had passed on. The thing I find quite haunting about all of this is the span, the time span.
Yeah, so Friday Nancy, Saturday Daniel, Sunday himself.
Yeah, so it's not... The argument of the sense of rage and the sense of like blind rage, that doesn't spread over 3 days.
Yeah, and I think on the Friday, shortly a couple of hours before Nancy, he'd gone to his doctor's office to get certain medications. I think some of it was the Xanax, actually. And he actually posed for a fan, and he's smiling in the photo. He's absolutely...
Well, he apparently he was still kind of wrestling in his head with the idea of going to that pay-per-view. Because he said that they're ill and don't worry about them, and he was still kind of thinking about possibly going to that. As we said before, he didn't want to let people down about these kind of things. Wrestling was very much his life. And so once this stuff would all emerge, it's debatable whether this emerged to WWE pre that show. Yeah. I still find that very hard to believe that they would know about that, but I think the only thing they're guilty of is acting rashly and doing it without waiting for all the facts. Yeah. But then when this would, properly emerge and, all the press would get hold of this story, the WWE had to act fast.
But there's also the argument to be made that if they did know what was going to come out news-wise, perhaps to capitalise on the viewings and the ratings.
Yeah, I just think it's not a long term. Like, that's a very short term, because there's going to be morally someone who's killed their family. It's just like that separates.
Yeah, that's true. But they're just saying it's been argued that they did know about it. I'm the same as you.
So Vince McMahon would go on to make an announcement saying, with the news following, they made a grave mistake in terms of what they did for the show and how Chris Benoit was going to be wiped from all history of WWE.
Yes, so Vince would go on to say, last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit tonight. On the contrary, tonight's show will be dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. This evening marks the first step of the healing process. Tonight, the WWE performers will do what they do better than anyone else in the world: entertain you.
So, following that, they were very strict on the rules of any mentions of Chris. Any signs in the crowd saying "Rest in peace" and future Hall of Fame Eddie and Chris written on signs, they were all taken away. And from the WWE network now, which is an online thing, there's no mention of Chris whatsoever. Yeah. They're very careful to completely wipe him out of history. Interesting watching one of the interviews where they essentially say the love of Chris's life was wrestling, and he said to other people before, no matter what they do to you, or you can leave a legacy, you can leave your mark. And following on from his actions, the thing that probably hurt him the most is that he's lost respect from all his peers, and his history has been completely erased from the thing he loves so much.
At the time, the WWE did everything they could to put immediate distance between themselves and him. So Vince, on the Thursday, the 28th of June, Vince McMahon would appear on the Today Show with Meredith Vieira.
There was no indication whatsoever that this man could possibly turn into this monster and do what he did. And again, we want to know the answers just like everyone else. Steroids may or may not had something to do with this. Other prescription drugs, other pressures in terms of his son and his wife. I don't know, and some of this perhaps we'll never know. But hopefully we can put it to bed as best we possibly can and determine once we have real evidence in terms of the toxicology report.
In the closing moments, Vince said that the company is not trying to hide the fact that Benoit was part of their organization because, in his words, unfortunately, he was. He added it was time to find a way to move on in the best way possible for the company and for its fans.
So the media was, I remember this as being a very big factor. What people said that what this was, it's the first time I ever heard it. The term roid rage was thrown about. Obviously, Chris being a very muscular guy, people thought he was abusing steroids, and they were saying that's the immediate thing. That's what's happened. He's taken these steroids and this caused roid rage, but there was no evidence to actually indicate that. As we said, over his career, countless concussions, which actually got his brain and gave it to medical science to kind of investigate it and look into it, and they could see that autopsies revealed that his brain resembled the nature of an 85-year-old Alzheimer patient. Because Chris Benoit's father reluctantly let his brain be examined, just to kind of see, because I mean, for a father, you're praying that there's something wrong, because you don't want your son to be capable of doing that. So he suffered from this thing called CTE on his brain, and other people that suffered from that before was a few American footballers, and one of them who started hearing voices. He ended up having a police chase, and he drove on the wrong side of the road and passed away in a car crash. It shows that this kind of effect on your brain can lead to paranoia, extreme paranoia, and kind of be very rash with how you behave.
Because there was that case as well. It's on Netflix. The Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez, the American footballer, who again had a series of multiple concussions, and then went on to commit all sorts of horrible crimes, including murders, and would eventually take his own life as well. So there's some eerie similarities.
Yeah, there's such a link between concussions, and that's now been. Luckily, I mean, even in football, it's now being taken. Head injuries are taken very seriously. In wrestling now, they chair shots aren't a thing. Yeah, well,
this event single-handedly changed the WWE's wellness policy.
The wellness policy, which essentially they look into your bloods and to make sure you're not abusing drugs. Apparently, some people refer to it as a joke. There's loopholes which were clearly easy for wrestlers to exploit. I mean, Benoit passed a blood test a short time before this.
In that Today Show interview that Vince gave, he stated that Benoit had a random drugs test, and this was 2 months before the crime, and it came back negative.
Chris Jericho would say what Chris did almost destroyed the business and almost took down the thing he loved the most. And David, his other son from his previous marriage, still very much looks up to his father. He looks, I mean, he looks exactly like
He's
Chris
definitely Benoit's son.
Which, carrying that around with you, and obviously a constant reminder. He said, he said screw them, talking about the WWE, because they deleted his legacy, but also they didn't give him any aftercare. JR did go to Nancy's funeral, but their family weren't happy to see him. They felt like he was just there to represent WWE and just to tick a box. Yeah. But David and Nancy's sister Sandra have reconnected over the years, and they're both helping each other trying to recover from this. It's such a sad state of affairs because he went down. Like, if you hear lots and lots of interviews with these wrestlers, they all say how much of a great guy Chris Benoit was, how he was one of the best in the game, and now it's completely been deleted from the history of it all.
Mm-hmm. Well, another interesting point, on Saturday, June the 30th, it was revealed that Chris Benoit had recently made a life insurance policy and included his ex-wife and 2 children from the previous marriage. However, he hadn't included Nancy and Daniel. So it was alleged that the general theory is that Chris had found out Nancy was going to leave him with Daniel, and Chris went crazy as a result. So that was something I hadn't heard.
So that could be an ulterior motive. That's the thing with motive with this. From countless interviews, it all seems to point to they have a volatile relationship, and it went, with Chris's kind of developing mental illness, it led to this. But that could be a clear thing that kind of was the last final straw there.
I mean, the media aftermath as well. You talked about people trying to come to terms with it, and the WWE deleting all of Chris's, history from their record books, as well as that the Jakks Pacific Toy Company immediately pulled all lines of merchandise for Chris Benoit, including action figures and t-shirts. You can actually still find Benoit merchandise on eBay, but it's going for some crazy prices, including a DVD that's at $130 mark.
So with this, obviously, as we mentioned, a lot of people either don't believe what happened was Chris, or they refuse to believe it. And a lot of people are fighting for the fact for Chris to be welcomed into the Hall of Fame. An alternative campaign is for Nancy Benoit to be welcomed into the Hall of Fame, because she was huge, and she was monumental in the kind of like developing a role in wrestling. One of the first like kind of big female characters who kind of really wasn't just there to kind of be looked at. She really
revolutionized that kind of manager.
Exactly. She really kind of developed that role, and she's led the way for like hundreds of women in the wrestling world. And it's a real shame that kind of this, when you hear this story, I mean, we heard it when we were a lot younger. You didn't really hear a lot about her. It's just all about Chris Benoit, and it's kind of very overshadowed. And I think it'd be the least the WWE could do, especially with how they've treated both families afterwards, would be welcoming Nancy Benoit into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And I remember, that's the thing, to go back to these guys and what they put their bodies through, and how relentless that schedule is. I remember finding out about Benoit dying, and I wasn't surprised. When you then find out what actually happened, that's when the surprise factored in.
Well, a wrestler dying...
It's no big shock, is it?
Yeah, it's no big shock.
I wasn't going to say big deal. No big shock.
It's not. You hear about it, and sadly, it's a regular occurrence, and usually it's because of years of abuse of either drugs or just the body being put through such things. So David still says that Chris is still his hero. His father's still his hero. He still looks up to him, and he's still one of the best wrestlers to ever to perform. Sandra, Nancy's sister, would go on to say, "Everyone deserves forgiveness. Everyone deserves mercy. I think within time there will be a day when I get on my knees and I finally say that I will forgive him. You never know. It might be tomorrow, but I do know it's not today." Which, yeah, I mean, when you see the interviews of her, she's obviously in bits, and like she still blames herself for certain elements, but obviously it's completely not her fault. No one was to know what was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, so Chris was nearly 40 at the time. He'd obviously had a heck of a career up to that point, put his body through, well, you already said the 85-year-old Alzheimer's
That's
patient.
I think 40 and he hit the brain like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you see him as well in like his last match, I mean, he is huge. He's absolutely swole, or whatever the phrase is. But he's achieved everything he wanted to achieve. He's now essentially one of the older dogs. He's peaked at that moment. We talked about WrestleMania 20 with Eddie. He's now in the company essentially to make the young talent coming through look good and put them over. So he's essentially in that kind of role.
The other things were he was feeling a lot of pressure because the rumours were circulating that WWE were about to give him a monster championship push, even this late on in his career, which kind of shows how much respect they had for him.
Yeah.
He was also planning for life after wrestling. He was considering opening up his own wrestling school in Atlanta. He already had shirt and logo prototypes developed and made. So he was very much planning for that. And I mean, it felt like this was a ticking time bomb that was going to, happen at some stage. And like we said, like he wasn't the person that he was before after all these blows to the head.
So a little bit of aftermath for you. The former physician for Chris Benoit, Dr. Phil Aston, was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for pleading guilty to 175 counts of distributing prescription drugs illegally and conspiring to distribute drugs. Aston ended up getting a plea deal with the prosecution and initially declared himself not guilty, but he would end up facing double that time and doing a 20-year sentence and $1 million fine on each of the 175 counts. And this was the doctor's office that Benoit actually had his photo taken in that final day.
So we like to do a little bit of trivia on these cases, a little bit of kind of interesting little facts about the cases. I didn't know this before doing the research, was that he was actually considered to play the part of Wolverine in X-Men. One of his names in wrestling was the Rabid Wolverine, and he would have been pitted against Sabretooth, who was another wrestler called Tyler Mane. So he would have, like you said, he didn't have charisma.
Yeah, I was a charisma fiend. I was.
So he wouldn't.
In terms of who I liked,
I don't think him acting would have been the best thing in the world. A clip of Bret Hart applying his sharpshooter finisher hold on Benoit appears in the opening credit sequence of Malcolm in the Middle.
Yes, it does. Well, on July 27th, 2012, the rap group Insane Clown Posse released a song called Chris Benoit. The song and video, however, are not about Benoit himself, but about a man's breakdown that is very similar to Benoit's. The song and music video do include stock footage and a recording of Chris Benoit before his death. A remix with rappers Ice Cube and Scarface was later released, with Ice Cube's verse being entirely about Benoit.
So it's called Chris Benoit. It's about a person. In the video, it has Chris Benoit in. It's got, no, well, actually, it's not about Chris Benoit. Well, that is... Okay.
Yeah.
Insane Clown Posse. If that's your story.
And we talked earlier. I mean, you made a little bit of a. You said his name was awful. Biff Wellington, Chris Benoit's first ever tag team partner. Now, this is interesting. Coincidentally, Wellington had a heart attack and his body was found on the same day that Chris Benoit's body was found.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't like the fact you said that. I made a joke about him and then you revealed that because I didn't know that bit, but it still is a terrible name. I stand by that.
Yeah. And then the only other thing was the Wikipedia controversy. So basically, the night that Chris Benoit had no show to the pay-per-view Vengeance, there was an online forum, like chat rooms, and there was speculation in there that he wasn't there because Nancy had passed away. And that was just literal speculation at the time. So someone had saw that and updated on Benoit's Wikipedia page that didn't attend Vengeance due to Nancy Benoit passing away.
The thing about that is that could be something as simple as people knowing how Chris was, and he wouldn't. There'd have to be a death or something for him not to go.
So to go back to that phone call to Chavo Guerrero, where he's like, "Chavo, I love you." First of all, completely out of character for him to say anything like that. But secondly, out of character for him to ever be late or no show an event. He was fixated, on being a professional. So there was a bunch of people in this chat room that then updated Wikipedia and rumors started to kind of snowball. Yeah. And then when it came out, the following day that actually this had happened, it was this guy, and it's a kid, it's like a 17, 18-year-old kid. He's brought in by police. Like, how did you know? And there's interrogation footage of there, but he literally he was, goofing around, updating Wikipedia pages, and just a wicked coincidence that kind of lined up.
The big case of one of the what ifs for this was he did actually reach out on that night that he killed Nancy to Bob Holly. He rang him up and invited him over that night. He went on to kill his wife, and Bob Holly turned him down, which left Chris very offended and upset. I mean, it's one of those where I'm sure Bob Holly looks at it now and he doesn't know. I imagine he feels a lot of guilt there, but we're not to know if that would have had, any effect on anything that would have gone on to happen. So that was the case of Chris Benoit and the Benoit family murders.
We hope you enjoyed that one. We know it was slightly different to our kind of, we don't really have a norm, but slightly different by our standards. And if you are a wrestling fan and we got anything wrong or there were terminology that we didn't quite use right, and you scored better than Tom in the pop quiz, then, apologies there.
You can't score better than perfect. Dude Perfect.
That could be your wrestling name.
Oh, is it Mr. Perfect?
Mr. Perfect, yeah. Dude Love.
I thought I nailed that. I thought I had a smug little smile there and I got it wrong. So if you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to give us a like and a subscribe. Give us a review on any of the audio platforms as well.
And if you fancy supporting us just that little bit more, we would love it if you checked out our Patreon page.
Give us your money. And if you don't want to get a virtual thing, you want to get a physical thing, something you can really hold and grasp, why not go to our store?
Hold and grasp. Benoit.
What? Well, I mean, everyone holds and grasps things, Ben. That's like knife and fork. People hold and grasp that. If you want to have something you can hold and grasp, I'll say it again, go to our store and pick up a lovely purchase.
Yeah. And if you could tell all of your friends about us, all of them, and I mean even the ones that you're not too sure about. I haven't got
any friends.
Then we'd really appreciate it. It really helps support us. And, we really appreciate you guys checking us out.
And as we always say, guys.
We always say this.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Unless it's taking too many bumps.
To the head, yeah.
To the head and wrestling.
And going on to commit horrible crimes.
Evil.
Thank you, guys.
Until See you next week.
Bye.
All right, then. Yeah, it's all right. That's good.